as Dara mentioned, I'm Carina, and I work for the UN Environment Program in Nairobi, Kenya. And in my unit specifically, we work on kind of youth and education, and we work on the formal side of things and the non-formal side of things. So one of our formal education projects was this little book of green nudges, which we just launched on September 1st. It was pushed back a little bit because of the whole kind of, global pandemic situation. So yeah, we just launched on September 1st and are really excited to share this with you. So let me just jump right in here. So the first thing that I wanted to do with you is to do a little exercise. So I would like you to take a look at the screen and try and remember as many of the words on the screen as possible. I'll just give you like 5 seconds to try and remember the words. Okay, now moving on. Try to see if you are able to remember the following words from that screen. Snore, wake, dream, and sleep. So just think to yourself, which of these words do I remember reading on the last screen? Now we're looking back again at the same list of words, and we can see, what was it? Wake and dream are here. What was the other one? I'm already forgetting. Snore is here. But the word sleep is actually not on this page. And this kind of ties into a behavioral insights concept that 40 to 55% of people falsely remember. Our memory is often influenced by context. We're not hyper-rational, so we're not a computer that remembers everything we've heard and seen. Sometimes we use shortcuts. We have kind of an automated way of thinking that often can lead to us falsely remembering things. So I guess I'm not able to ask how many of you actually remember the word sleep, but we'll just go with this statistic of 40 to 55%. But this kind of is, this ties into the whole behavioral insights concept behind, which is kind of behind the concept of nudging that we will talk about more. So this leads us into the Little Book of Green Nudges. So what is the Little Book of Green Nudges, first of all? So it's a quick guide to reducing your campus's environmental impact through behavioral change. It summarizes the evidence around what nudges work best, while seeking to encourage more sustainable practices among students and staff across different categories of behavior. It also provides simple guidance on how you can implement and evaluate behavioral interventions in a variety of contexts. So basically, we have used the behavioral science around nudges as a way to encourage sustainable behavior change on campuses. That's kind of the quick overview of what the Little Book of Green Nudges is. Now, a bit of background, just to give you a bit more understanding of how we got here. As we all know, climate change has been highlighted as one of the most critical consequences of unsustainable consumption and production patterns. So linking climate change resilience and mitigation efforts with low carbon lifestyles offers us an opportunity to re-examine our social and economic systems and consider how lifestyle choices affect the environment. As universities are the incubators of future entrepreneurs, leaders, and decision makers, we just kind of started thinking about how can we help equip students with the skills and knowledge that is needed to achieve the SDGs and to facilitate more sustainable behaviors of individuals on campuses, but also beyond into their lives. And so because of this, we thought that universities are the ideal places for instilling pro-environmental values. It's often the first time that students are away from home, and they're forming new routines, new identities, and it's kind of this perfect moment in time to try and encourage sustainable habits to become part of their future lifestyles. So the vision kind of behind this is to help universities, which includes staff and students all over the world, to significantly reduce their environmental impact through behavior change. This will also ultimately help to protect biodiversity and the natural world that we all rely on. And the driving mission is to provide evidence-based nudging options derived from this field of research to support universities to develop, implement, and evaluate behavioral change interventions and to promote sustainable lifestyles on campus. So that's kind of a bit of the more behavior change theory background that led us to this point. So now you might be wondering, what are nudges? What is this word nudges that we keep using? So a nudge is a positive and gentle persuasion to influence behaviors and decisions. It includes choice architecture, default setting, social influence, and increased salience. So for example, instead of me telling you to reduce the amount of water that you consume and directly giving you instructions on how you can do that, I could choose to nudge you to use less water by, for example, installing a timer on your shower sneakily that would cause the water to, turn off after a minute. So that's kind of a nudge that makes you, it doesn't necessarily tell you to do something, but it subconsciously influences you to change your behavior. And the reason behind using nudges is that giving people information doesn't always mean they will take action. So you can have posters everywhere saying, hey, you should, reduce your water usage, do this, but it doesn't necessarily mean it will be done. And again, we're not computers. We don't take in information and then act on it. Not always, sometimes we do. So who is this nudging concept and the Little Book of Green Nudges for? It's basically for anyone on campus who wants to create positive change at their university. So it includes provosts, campus sustainability coordinators, student leaders, faculty. It can really be anyone who is able to take the nudge and implement it on campus. So it can even be a student group working with, the catering department. It's pretty open to anyone on campus to try and to get engaged with this. And we have a lot of different examples from different parts of the world as well. And so we're hoping it's fairly applicable in the global context. And we have, there's a lot of nudging currently taking place is coming from the West, but we do have some cool examples from other parts of the world that I will share with you as well. So just a quick statistic for you. There are currently 250 million students enrolled in higher education in the world, which also means 250 million people are making lifestyle choices every day. Of course, not all of these 250 million students are fresh out of high school, moving out of their parents' houses for the first time, but a majority of them are. And by 2040, this number is projected to increase to 600 million. So this just kind of emphasizes the point as to why we're focusing on universities with this nudging concept. So here I just have a little bit of an overview again, going back to the behavioral change theory behind this booklet. So when thinking of a nudge to create and implement, we kind of have these 4 guiding principles, and it's called the EAST framework. So the first one is to make it easy. This kind of builds on the idea that people often take the path of least resistance. So if you offer a choice that's more easily accessible in the cafeteria, it's at the front of the cooler, it's easy to grab. People are more likely to engage. The next one is to make it attractive. So humans are more likely to adopt a behavior when it captures our attention or is in line with our motivation and beliefs. The next one is to make it social. human behavior is hugely influenced by what others around us are doing. So making sure the nudge is social, or you see other people engaging in this behavior change nudge, it's more likely to make you want to engage with it as well. And then the last one is to make it timely. People are creatures of habit, so nudges are most effective at moments of change in people's lives. So again, kind of goes back to university being a great time to expose people to nudges like this. All right, so here I have a few case study examples that I wanted to share with you. Our first one is from Mahidol University in Thailand. So at Mahidol University, recycling is very eye-catching. They have a recyclable waste bank project, which basically you get recycling points that mimic a bank's transaction and withdrawal system. So when people deposit recyclable items, they get a bank statement that shows the value of the items that they deposited, and then they can either withdraw it in cash or save it into their case study account. The university's IT division then has created software for the project, and the banks have expanded this beyond the campus into elementary schools in the community as well. So this has been like a really fun way for students to, recycle. It's they can get cash from it, or just it makes it a more interesting experience as well. Another quick one from Tongji University in China. They have these kind of like garbage and recycling sorting, waste sorting gaming machines where you play a game with the piece of recycling that you've inserted. It's also quite fun. The next case study is from Carina University in Kenya. So they've recently branded themselves a green university, and they've established a Green and Innovations Competition Week where teams of students submit projects that address environmental issues, mainly through social and technological innovations, and then they can win prizes in the end if they win the competition. So it's kind of an incentive for students to think about, how can we make things better on our campus? How can we make a difference environmentally? And then they get a prize for it. Two more quick examples here. One from UBC in Canada. So they run a seasonal shutdown campaign, which encourages campus department buildings to turn off and unplug electronics during the winter break. They're given a checklist to help them, which is also considered a nudge. Because it's just kind of a resource for them to make their nudging implementation more effective. And then our last one is from Ireland, University College Cork, and they've reduced the hassle of using reusable cups by installing cup washers on campus. And they saw a 20% increase in reusable cup use. So just making it easier for people to want to use their reusable cups by doing something as simple as installing reusable cup washers. So these are just a few of the examples that we have in our publication. We have a whole lot more examples in there that I encourage you to check out because they're really interesting. But yeah, just a little taste of what campuses around the world have been doing on nudging. Okay, so now I just wanted to give a quick overview of kind of the process that we're going through with this booklet. So the first phase for us was to actually produce and launch the Little Book of Green Nudges, which took place on September 1st. And now we're having a variety of launch events in different parts of the world. So the booklet's being translated into Spanish, French, Chinese, and Arabic. So accompanying the translation, we're doing little launch events in different parts of the world to then also discuss what kind of nudges fit in different parts of the world, because it's not always the same. Then our second phase is outreach to campuses and to call for nominations for our third phase, which is the pilot phase. So I'm going to talk about the pilot phase a little bit more. And this is also a way for campuses to get involved with the Little Book of Green Nudges. So basically, the pilot phase will launch in early 2021 and run for 1 year. And of course, this is dependent also on the state of the global pandemic. We're hoping it can launch in early 2021. But of course, campuses need to be kind of up and running again for this to work. So that's still kind of a tentative date on our end. But the way it works is, first you would nominate your campus. So again, this can be, you know, the head of a university, can be a faculty member, a student, anyone who's interested in implementing a nudge. So you would nominate your campus and sign them up as a pilot campus by October 30th. And basically, what does it mean to nominate your campus? It means that you are committing to implementing one nudge on your campus for during that 1 year timeline, and to basically let us know how it's going. So you're going to implement the nudge, see how, what works, what are the challenges, what are the barriers I'm facing, is it going well? And then over the course of the year, we'll have different things set up to support you. And at the end, we'll be collecting all the information to kind of help share best practices with others. So I've kind of gone all over the place with my timeline here, but so once you sign up your campus as a pilot campus by October 30th, you would choose your actions. So from the 40 nudges that are in the little book of green nudges, you would select at least one, depending on your capacity, that you want to implement. Then we'll be having an information session in November to just explain more about how the pilot phase will work and to offer a bit more background and support. And then you will be submitting a commitment and implementation plan to us, which is just kind of a very simple overview of how you will be implementing this nudge over the next year. The next step is then to go out and implement it, share progress. You can bring other universities on board, other people on your campus can get involved. And we'll have a series of further webinars for people to tune in and just kind of, again, share best practices, talk to other pilot campuses and kind of see what's going on and form a bit of a community around the nudging process. And then the last bit will be to share your results and best practices, and then to evaluate how the pilot phase went for you, which will be more towards the end of the year. Okay, so that's kind of where I'll leave it for the little book of green nudges for now. We're really hoping we have about 120 pilot campuses on board so far, as well as a whole bunch of student groups, which is also almost over 100 that are going to be implementing nudges. So that's really exciting. I believe we have University College Cork has signed up. And I encourage anyone who's listening to also either sign up or get in touch if anything's unclear or you have any questions about the pilot phase. And then there's just one other thing that I wanted to share with you before I stop talking. And that is another piece of work that we've been doing at UN Environment around higher education decarbonization. So basically, just a really brief overview. We have this global climate letter that we launched last year. It's been signed by it's actually been signed by over 300 universities, but this 560 universities on the screen is combined with another letter or commitment in the US that has been made, the President's commitment through Second Nature. We've teamed up and we're now part of the race to zero in the lead up to COP26 next year. And so in total, we have 560 universities and colleges that have committed to go net zero by 2050 at the latest. And many also have earlier decarbonization targets. And I just wanted to share that with you because we do have 4 Irish signatories, which is really, really awesome. And just to give you a quick overview, the signatory commitments include, like I said, the reaching net zero by 2050 at the latest, mobilizing more resources for action-oriented climate change research, and then increasing the delivery of environmental education across curriculum and campuses. So those are 3 pretty big commitments, but we are also doing our best to also support signatories with those commitments and do our follow-up with everyone on reporting, especially on the net zero target. So I just wanted to share a little call to action to any universities out there who want to sign on to this. We already have 4 from Ireland, which is awesome. So just another kind of way to get involved in the higher education sphere. So that is the end of my presentation for today. Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions about the Little Book of Green Nudges or the Global Climate Letter, you're more than welcome to send me an email. It's here on the screen. Or you can also find it on our UN Environment website.
Okay, so my name is Samantha. I'm the Sustainability Manager in DCU. Thank you very much, Carina. That was a very nice talk, and I think it leads really well into this, in that I guess we have been part of the Antashka Green program, campus program now for 7 or 8 years. And I guess in my head, it is that we have been nudging all the time and working with all of the people in the network across DCU or across the Antashka network to nudge all of our people all the time to try and make changes. What we in DCU have been focusing on for the last while is kind of like this drive to zero. And if we don't understand where our impacts are, then it's very difficult to target where we should be putting those nudges or those encouragements to do it. So we started looking at carbon as this kind of equalizer of actions, so that if we can count everything into carbon, then we can actually see if we can balance our actions and use it as nearly a communication tool. Now, we do understand that carbon is not the whole idea about sustainability or about climate change, and that if we don't have a reasonable biosphere, then if we don't tackle the issues of climate change and all the rest of it, then we'll never tackle the issues of the biosphere and the biodiversity loss that's going on. So it's all, I guess, with sustainability, it's a balancing of all actions. So it's social, cultural, economic, and environment, and how we balance the whole lot of it. But I guess this talk is going to focus on the carbon bit and how we were using it as a communication tool to encourage people to do the changes that we want. So I'm going to look at carbon and whether carbon is the king of KPIs when it comes to getting people to understand what we're talking about and to actually make the changes that are necessary, looking at the impacts of what they're doing in their own lives. So, carbon budgets. My understanding of carbon budgets is that there is a kind of a box left up in the atmosphere that we have got space to put in remaining carbon to keep us within the 1.5 degree scenario that we all agreed to at the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So if we don't stay below this box that we have left in the atmosphere, then we're going to drive the planet over 1.5 degrees. And we all know that there's really serious implications if we go above that temperature. So, some of the work being done by the engineers in DCU and with colleagues in Trinity is looking at a global carbon budget. And so the estimated global carbon budget is about 1,170 gigatons of carbon. Now I'm using this as an example, and it is only looking at carbon. It's not carbon equivalents. It's just to give people the idea of what's going on. So this box that's left up in the atmosphere for us to put carbon into is 1,170 gigatons of carbon. And so the work that the guys have done from engineering, Barry McMullen and Paul Price, is looking at if we did an equitable distribution of that carbon budget across all countries. And equitable meaning that we are the privileged, we are the ones who have consumed the vast majority of the carbon to date. And so therefore those in the developing worlds get to use more carbon than we do going forward if we are to stay within the 1.5 degree scenarios. So the Irish carbon budget looks like this. So we have 19–20% of our emissions come from the energy industries. A huge amount comes from agriculture, so about 33%, and then a large amount from transport as well. So the average annual emissions for Ireland, and this is just looking at the CO2, is about 40 megatons of carbon per annum in Ireland. So if we remember that the equitable budget is 391 megatons, that means we've got about 10 years left before we reach the Irish budget. But this data actually was made the data comes from 2015. So this means that we are expecting to consume our carbon budget by 2024, 2025. Now that doesn't mean that we breached the planetary boundaries. This just means that Ireland, with an ethical and moral hat on, needs to write a promissory note with every gram of carbon that we emit after those dates to say we're going to take it back down. Because if we consume it and say, right, that's it, it's consumed, then those in the developing world, and if we're looking for a just climate justice, then they are deserving of that much more than we are. So we need to actually make sure that we take it back down. And so this is where Ireland is actually going with it at the moment. So this is EPA data, Environmental Protection Agency data, 2013 to 2020. So we have a target from the EU of a 20% reduction over 2005 levels by 2020. And this is looking at non-ETS, so non-emissions traded emissions. In the latest report in July 2020 from the EPA, it says that with our existing measures, we might reach 2% of that target. And if we put in additional measures, then we might hit 4%. But whichever way you look at it, we're not actually getting anywhere close to where we actually should be going with it. And so what are we going to do? So this is what our current plan is saying that we're going to do. We're going to energy industries, we're going to put 70% energy renewable onto the grid, and so the grid greens. And so as the grid greens, the electricity greens, and everybody gets a little bit more greener. We're going to have to tackle agriculture. It's one of the biggest challenges for Ireland because it is the largest sector of emissions that we are emitting. We are going to retrofit 600,000 homes with heat pumps between now and 2030. We're going to continue the energy efficiency programs that go on with the public sector buildings. And we're going to have at least 1 million new electric vehicles on the roads by 2030, which that's what our plan is. And whether one agrees with it or not, that's what the plan is. I think putting more vehicles on the road is probably not where we're going. So we, from a DCU perspective, we're going, okay, we need to understand where our impacts are. And what we did over the last couple of years was look at all the different methodologies that are out there for calculating carbon footprints. And we've decided to go with the GHG protocol, which is a broadly used protocol by lots of people that divides your carbon emissions up into 3 scopes. So we have scope 1, which is your direct carbon emissions that you come from burning stuff on site. So it's your natural gas that you would burn in your boilers or oil in your boilers for heating. It would be any fuels used by vehicles owned by the organisations, and it includes fugitive refrigerants. So those are the emissions that come from fridges or freezers or air conditioning systems that you would have on site. For scope 2 is indirect emissions, and it's the purchased electricity. So, and it is all of the emissions associated with the production of that electricity and the delivery of that electricity to your organisation. And then scope 3 is everything else. And most people only concentrate on scope 1 and scope 2 and don't actually pay much heed to scope 3. So we started paying some heed to scope 3 and started looking at it. So this is what we do. We do natural gas. Most of the top ones come from bills that we will get in the door. Natural gas bills, electricity bills, all the rest of it. For the staff and student commuting, we use mobility. We use mobility surveys that we do on an annual basis. Staff travel, we have a system with all public sector bodies. We use the travel companies to actually capture the flights that we're going in that on, so we capture all the carbon emissions as well. We estimated the travel for academic travel, and we have waste and water. And then we did purchase goods and services. So we used an environmentally adjusted input-output model where we took the entire spends of all of the DCU companies. The operational boundary we decided on was to be as broad as possible so that nobody could come back later and go, you didn't include them, or you didn't include that, or you didn't include something else. So we said, right, anything that DCU has got its fingers in, we're going to actually include it. So we got the financial budgets, or the financial spends for the year for everything, so including the Helix, which is a big conference centre on site, our catering companies, all of our campus residences, and you categorise them into different categories. You put them into this input-output model, and it actually uses a emissions factor and can create your carbon emissions associated with them. Now the error bars are still really big on it, but the idea is that it does start to give you some information on where stuff is coming from. And we have looked at others and compared it to others, and it's in a similar ballpark. Now, DCU has been doing carbon footprints for a long time, but from, we'll say, 2010 to 2015, we would only have looked at it from an energy perspective. We were reporting about 13,000 tonnes of carbon emissions. In 2017, we started throwing in some of the transport stuff, so we went from 13 all the way up to 25,000 tonnes. And then But that was still 55% focusing on energy. And then in 2018, we jumped to 64,000 tonnes. And my president went, for heaven's sake, Fahy, what are you doing? You're supposed to be making it going down, not going up. But this is, it's not, of course, that we didn't produce much more carbon. It is that we just counted it better. And so the big one was procurement. It was all of our purchased goods and services. And a large proportion of that was purchased goods and services associated with construction on campus. But what it does start to show is that our energy consumption is only about 20%, very similar to our staff and student commuting. But the vast majority of investment that would go in the university to actually reduce our impacts from a climate change perspective would all be going into our energy. And so we repeated it again in 2019. And it's not dissimilar, it's just the staff and student commuting is a larger proportion because purchased goods and services have reduced, specifically because construction was much less in 2019, because we built 2 buildings in 2018 and no buildings in 2019. So one of the big things that went up though as well to watch is fugitive refrigerants. So in 2019, our fugitive refrigerants are bigger than our business travel. So the emissions coming from our fridges and freezers and air conditioning across campus is larger than every flight that the academics took from campus. And there's a lot of academics taking flights from our campuses. Fugitive refrigerants are much higher because, of course, there is a large global warming potential associated with the refrigerants in that. And the reason they increase so much is we just got much better. So we now keep a register of all fugitive refrigerants so that we know and report on them on an annual basis. Our staff and student commuting went up significantly because we also believe that because of the demands on accommodation in the Dublin region, there's been an awful lot more people actually commuting from much further away to attend university rather than what had been in the past. And our purchased goods and services went down significantly because we didn't build any buildings in that year. So then we took the DCU one and tried to actually see, well, where does that live within the national inventory? So that, I guess, if we see the new climate bill that has just been published, this is the draft one that was just published this week, they start to talk about carbon budgets and sectoral carbon budgets. And we wanted to know, well, what's that going to mean for us? So where do we live in the national inventory? And it's actually not an easy thing to do. You can't just go, the DCU lives within the public sector. Our emissions are split out over the entire thing. So some of it is in energy, commercial and institutional, some of it is in road transport, some of it's not included at all. And so we tried to do our best to actually do a direct map over, and we estimated that about 55% of our energy, of our emissions are actually captured in the EPA national inventory. And that's not saying there's not in there someplace, but it is that these are the ones that are within our direct control, and some of these are, so for instance, the flights. You do not capture the emissions from any international flights, any European or international flights in national inventories because they're someplace we're not going to worry about them. They're over there someplace, we're not going to worry about them just yet. So we then set some science-based targets for ourselves to go, okay, well, if we really want to stay within the 1.5 degree scenario by 2030, what do we need to reduce by? So we went, this is it. There's a tool that you can stick your emissions into so that it gives you what you're supposed to reduce by. And so this is just an example of one of them. Now, it's also, we'll say, DCU has been part of the SEI public sector energy efficiency targets so we've had this system where we've measured all of our consumption levels for the last 10 years with the SEAI, and you have to reach a 33% energy efficiency target by 2020. So in 2018, DCU had already exceeded that and were more than 10% above it, so we had already achieved a 43.4% energy efficiency target. Now, what people need to understand is that energy efficiency targets are not the same as absolutes of anything because they're a normalized number. And so what that means is that we have avoided a whole ton of additional emissions. It doesn't mean that we reduced any of our consumption levels. So over the last 10 years, our emission levels have actually stayed quite stable, whereas we were actually have achieved a 43% energy, actually in 2019, we're going up to 47%. But if we were looking at, and SEI are looking at bringing in these absolute reductions so that we actually will have to have an absolute reduction in carbon emissions, and that will go from 2021 to 2030, and they're looking at a 30% absolute reduction. We were looking at a 4.2% to stay within, based on our science-based targets. And sitting in some of the meetings with the CEI folk, they go, oh, but that's just not enough. 30% is not enough. We just have to do more. And I went, okay, go and figure out what 30% means first before you go and say that. So we reckoned that what we would need to reduce on an annual basis was about 660 tons of CO2, and this was just for energy. And so what would that mean for the DCU campus? Well, in 2018, one of our campuses, the annual energy emissions from our Al Hallows campus in 2018 was 545 tons. So we would actually have to shut down All Hallows this year. Now, next year, we'll shut down half of St. Pat's of another campus. And every year, we would have to shut down campuses if we don't actually change what we're actually doing, changing the business model by which we're actually delivering stuff. Because if we don't understand where the impacts ever come from, and we were not intending to actually shut down our campuses, but it's the idea of looking at the scale of the challenge that we're facing if we're actually going to look at this net zero or trying to balance our equations in the end. So I'm nearly finishing. This is, I guess, a picture that I throw up in an awful lot of my talks, and it's an environmental letters paper from 2017. But it looks at the personal choices of reducing your contribution to climate change. So it looks at, we'll say, recycling. And I have an awful lot of people who will come to me and say, Sam, really, really, really good at recycling. I recycle loads. So I was so good at recycling that we decided to pop over to New York for the weekend just as a treat. And you're kind of going, okay, one, if you've been recycling those, then you're consuming too much. But two, this is the impact of recycling. This here is the impact of one less transatlantic flight. Just one. This is only going one way. Go the other way, and I mean, your recycling is completely negated by the fact that you're actually taking flights all over the place. Of course, the big elephant in the room that we don't want to discuss is having one less child. So that we have to look at population growth and how that needs to be managed because we're on a finite planet. So I encourage all of our students in DCU to understand their impacts by using carbon as a way of kind of balancing or seeing the comparison for where your impacts are. So a normal DCU student, 57% of their impacts come from their transport of how they get to and from campus. They have a significant 10% on food and 20% on energy, but understanding where they're coming from at least can help them to address what they're doing. The average carbon footprint of a student was 22 tons of CO2 equivalents per annum. What we're hoping to try and get to is to about 2 to make it a net zero contribution. So I would encourage everybody to go and do their own carbon footprint and see what it is. And then my final or nearly final slide is looking at offsetting. So the idea that if we offset, that we can actually continue to do what we should be doing. So offsetting, is it a useful thing to do or is it greenwashing? Now, in my opinion, it is absolutely a necessary thing that we have to do, but it should not be used as a permission to continue to behave badly or a permission to actually continue to do things the way we're doing. So this is a cut and paste from the SEI Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland's monitoring reporting data for DCU for 2018. So this is we had 13,000 tons or 13 million tons of 13 million kilograms of CO2, and they reckon that was equivalent to about 80,000 trees. So I went, okay, well, how much space would I need to go to plant all of those trees? Nothing to do with the cost, let's just think about the space first and all the rest of it. So if I was to plant alders, and I don't know what trees they're suggesting in here, I was just trying to figure out what scale of thing that this would mean. And I looked up how much space I would need to put an alder tree into. So I'd need about 3.5 kilometers squared to cover the DCU 2018 emissions. This is our total emissions. I'd need about 0.7 of a kilometre squared just for the energy ones. But then if I wanted red oaks, because they need much more space, then I need about 31 kilometres squared. Now we've already been doing some work on this as well, looking at Sitka spruce, because there was a research paper done on how much carbon could be sequestered by a hectare of Sitka spruce. And we looked at that from a DCU perspective, and that estimated that we would need about 156 kilometres squared to just offset our 2018 emissions. Now, Dublin is about 115 metres squared, and there's probably lots of people on the call who wouldn't half mind covering Dublin in trees. But we would have to cover Dublin in trees this year. And next year we would have to cover Wicklow, because this is per annum. So these trees offset for their lifetime this amount. So I've covered Dublin in trees to cover this year. I need to cover, and so offsetting is a really useful thing to do, but it will not help if we don't actually change what we're doing. So we need to not use it as an ability to maintain business as usual. So one of the things we started doing was reporting under CDP, so that we would have some external validation for the methodologies that we were using and how it's built into the university system. So we have it built into our risk management part of the university, it's built into the finance part of it, to try and get people to consider it across all aspects of the university. So we were the first university globally to report under CDP. We also open sourced our data on our carbon footprint so that everybody can actually see what we did. And we are absolutely open to feedback or criticism or encouragement or pointing out where we've gone wrong in it, because the whole idea is that sustainability, if we're actually going to become more sustainable, is a collaborative action and not a competitive one. And it'll never actually work unless we actually work together to deliver it. That's me. Thank you very much.
To Sam and Carina, I think this will feed into and lead into this presentation, which is a bit more grounded in the practice, I guess, to some extent, and looking at the way that trees, as Sam just outlined, are used to both mitigate climate change, but also we have a job in reevaluating how we use our natural resources ourselves, so we stop the importation of things like fuel and heavy carbon fuels particularly. So I work in a campus in GMIT in Letterfrack. It's one of 5 campuses for GMIT. It's based in the west of Ireland, right on the foothills of Connemara National Park. And we were established in 1987 as a community partnership with an organisation called Connemara West. And we have degrees in furniture design, wood technology, teacher education. Small campus of about 240 students, and just at the very bottom of the image you see there, a green flag, which we first got in 2014. So just in terms of some of the conversation there around trees and around their role in climate mitigation. So obviously as trees are growing, they're using up carbon dioxide and putting oxygen back into the air. And there's lots of different rates that trees grow, but generally as they grow, they absorb the carbon and they store, they absorb carbon dioxide and they store the carbon. And for every tree that is grown and produced in timber-wise, it actually takes 1.8 tons out of the atmosphere on average. Whereas if we look at things like steel and cement, they are hugely carbon heavy and emit 1.85 or 0.87 tons. And that's not, taking into account the effect on environment and from mining and all of the destruction that takes place in natural environments as well. So basically, as wood stores carbon and it continues to hold that carbon even after it's felled until it decays or it's burned. So what does that look like? Well, a kilo of carbon actually is here presented in a piece of oak that we did for the tree week this year with Quilcha, which unfortunately got cancelled due to COVID. But that's a 12 centimetre by 12 centimetre cube of oak, and that contains 1 kilo of CO2. So when Sam is talking about those megatons of CO2, you can see the quantities that we're talking about. And actually this piece of oak was grown in Ors Lutron. It's over 200 years old, and imagine it's still holding that carbon. So until it's actually decayed or burnt, it will continue to do that. And when we're thinking about timber then and building for climate resilience, I mean, timber is now being realized as a super structure material. And using timber in buildings, lowers CO2 emissions. And it also supports economic, social, environmental sustainability, which is a key aspect of the Sustainable Development Goals. We have local jobs, materials and value being added into local economies. These are 2 images, and Carina, this is one from Canada, from Vancouver, a newly designed building, 40 floors, and they're calling it the Earth Tower in Vancouver. And in the middle is the Forest Green Football Club, one of the greenest football clubs in the world, they say, and they're part of the United Nations Climate Neutral now, and this is their plans to build a 5,000-seater stadium all out of timber. So timber is becoming the now as opposed to what it used to be, the future. So just a glance at Ireland's forestry, we have about 12% forest cover, one of the lowest in Europe. About 80% of that is conifers, plantation used for construction, MDF. We actually produce so much, we actually export that side of type of timber. Whereas on the broadleaf side, we have about 20% coverage, but mostly scrub trees, individual mature trees, some plantations developing, a lot used for craft, but an awful lot of this timber actually ends up going for firewood as well. And we import approximately 90 to 95% of the timber that we use in this area. So what's happening is we're breaking connections, and this is, I suppose, coming back to the social science part of it. We're breaking connections, we're fragmenting knowledge, so there's a disconnection between people, materials, and the environment. And that goes back to Marxism and his critique of capitalism, the division of labor. And what's happening on the ground then is that people who use timber do not always consider the forest ecology, and people who grow trees don't always consider timber utilization. So one of the projects that we did with our students was we developed a community native woodland. And this was a collaboration with Connemara National Park. We planted 3 acres or 2.6 hectares of trees, all native, about 5,000, 9 different species, big support of biodiversity in the area, but also hugely community involvement. We had about 20 different organizations working with us, and every year we do a replanting, and it's an annual day out for the community. And for us on the ground then was, we decided to invest in a new research facility for Irish hardwood timber. And we put in place primary processing, saw, kiln, conversion of raw material ourselves. So we could start taking Irish timber and put it into use in the college. Up to this time, we were pretty much using no Irish timber. And that was supported by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. So in 2020 now on campus, we're looking at about 50% of Irish timber being used in our student projects in learning. These are locally felled trees, some individually, you know, as close to 500 meters from the college. But we're sourcing also from continuous cover forest owners around Ireland. And we're building awareness for the woodland owners too by showing them and demonstrating the utilization. And of course, now we have students involved in the full process. They're involved in the planting, the conversion, and hopefully understanding more of how trees are produced. So a lot of different projects can come out of that. We're involved in the Ubuntu Network for Teacher Education, switching towards active experiential learning pedagogies, which are critical for sustainability learning. We also can talk about global deforestation. But it's not just about the environment. We can bring this into business, and Sam has already mentioned, and Carina, about corporate responsibility, green procurement, circular economy, lean production. And we can also then look at how knowing about timber and the story of timber can add value to products that we create. And so now it's no longer, you know, just a box made of beech, but it's a box made from beech from Clifton. It's a table made from ash from Orsa-Uachtaráin. It's a stool made from Elm from Kylemore Abbey. So you're building that story and the connection with people and the materials and the place into the products and raising awareness while you're doing that. And just as an example, we got a lot of trees from Orsa-Uachtaráin and they were used in different community projects. This brought real great interest from a lot of the students, particularly. The students went and visited Orsa-Uachtaráin and gave gifts to Michael D. Higgins for visiting dignitaries. And we wrote a book, and I think Dara's going to give a little prize in a while of some of those, I think, Dara. So it's about building stories and about the value of the story so much. And when we look at that and translate that into products, then on the left we have bar toppers for a local brewery that we did. And these are the toppers that sit on the bar to advertise the beer. But the Clifton Brewery, the timber comes from Clifton, so you're not knitting it back into their story and into their value for their customers. The one on the right is a project we did with the 12 Bend Cycling Club. So I hate these medals, by the way. I think they should be banned outright. Finishers medals for anything should be banned outright. Take that to the print, Dara, please. But we said, okay, well, if we're going to do them, let's do something slightly different that'll raise awareness. So these were made out of sycamore from Westport House. And at the end of use of these are a coaster for the cup that went with each participant. So it's not something that just gets hung up on the wall. It's from a natural material and can get a second life. And then we see the value of this, and it is, I keep coming back to this, we're seeing huge interest and the necessity to engage in this, not just from a teaching and learning perspective, but from a research perspective. So this is a project we did for, as part of Horizon 2020 project on a low energy tablet that could be redesigned for remanufactured for long use. And the casing in that was actually done in oak and done in Irish oak, and again built value into the actual story of the product. And this product was all around local manufacturing, local maintenance. This is another project that we're involved in with Teagasc, and what we found is, and I'm sure the other speakers will attest to, the way that we collaborate and the more that we can use transdisciplinary learning and get away from the boundaries of knowledge that are typically upheld within our institutions, the more we'll actually learn. And this is a really interesting project with Teagasc, and we're looking at small diameter alder that are typically the thinnings of all the forests that we're planting, and typically these go for firewood when they're small trees. So we're looking at opportunities to actually add value to those and looking at new markets for them. And that project is actually moving along nicely with some really interesting outputs from it already to date. And so just to finish out, I thought it was a nice one just to close the loop. This is a project that one of our lecturers, Sean Garvey, does with his first year students. Martin Carney, a technician, also heavily involved. And the students plant an acorn in their first year when they're learning about the materials that they're using. The seeds are sourced and they're native seeds, so as much as possible we're keeping everything native to Ireland. And as they grow themselves, the acorns, so too do our students. And when they graduate, they'll be receiving a graduate tree. And it just closes the loop from start to finish, and it just shows you how the initiation of a project, you know, where we felt we wanted to do more with Irish timber, can lead to absolutely multitude of different engaging projects that are really exciting for students to be involved in, but also really important that they can understand how they can do their small bit locally and how that can impact the global challenges that we're all facing. And I think that's always the way we have to ground it, because the challenges are enormous and we have to see, well, how can we play our role? So that's it, Dara. Thanks very much for everybody's time, and just some references there if anybody wants to follow up, but you'll be sharing that. So thanks, Dara.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dermot. So Alison, if you can change our screen. Yes, so we've active speaker. So just a couple of questions before we finish up. So there's a couple here for Dermot. So how important would diversity of trees in our forest be, Dermot?
Massively. Yeah, we have a desperately skewed forestry mix towards Sitka spruce, and that's why we have so many challenges and people there's so much contestation around forestry. So we need to plant more native trees both for biodiversity, but also for local economies, as opposed to being purely plantation focused. And that is a policy objective, but we need to create markets for that material, and that's one of the things that we're doing through some of those initiatives.
Brilliant. And for Sam, I'm not sure, you might have answered it during your presentation, but there was a question there about, I suppose, the origins of the Green Camps program in DCU. Like, where did it originate in DCU? And maybe Dermot could share from Letterfrack as well, where how it originated on your campus. So
absolutely. So I typed in the answer as well. I guess I would say that it was a joint effort. Probably there was a lot of academics going on for a couple of years. So we started our first probably sustainable development policy in 2010-ish. But a huge driver was the then president, Brewing McGrath, who retired earlier this year. And he was the founding president who created the position of sustainability manager. I think that was a key role to actually kind of create the continuity that was able to pull all the strings together to actually get our first green flags and continue the green flag process across DCU. I would just say on the forestry levels as well, I was on the Environmental Ireland conference this morning, and the director of can't remember what he was the director of, but one of the forestry agencies was saying that Ireland used to be 80% covered with forests, and we're now less than 2%. So I was reckoning, if we could at least offset some of DCU's carbon footprint by covering Dublin in trees, we'd be getting a little way back towards creating some balance back into the system.
And Dermot, when, I suppose, how did Green Campus originate in GMIT Letterfrack?
Purely from the ground up, Dara. Yeah, ours was different to Sam's, and I applaud the leadership, institutional leadership, because that's a critical part of the whole movement. But ours actually is ground up very much. Loads of people really interested and willing to do things, and often things just against the grain, excuse the pun. But in terms of engagement for students, there's been a massive shift in the last 5 years, I've seen, and our Green Campus now is led by students, and the staff have taken a step back and looked at other projects and research and teaching and learning. So that's a big shift. But one thing I would say about Sam's presentation in particular, this shouldn't just be for Sam. That work is incredible, and it's really challenging work, but there's a template there that needs to be adopted across the sector for higher education, because we're like a large business, we're like a large town, we're like a city between 400,000 to 500,000 students across the country. We need to be activated, and there's a massive energy among students to be involved, and we need to give them the vehicle to do that. So I think that's a great piece of work, and hopefully we'll see that begin to shift the momentum, because we've been slow to the table, I think, generally.